And welcome. Our top story at this hour, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, that is China, France, Russia, the UK and the United States, have at least found one common ground when it comes to Afghanistan, and they all want the Taliban to be more inclusive. Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that the Security Council powers all want a peaceful and stable Afghanistan where the rights of women are respected and one that is not a sanctuary for terrorism. The meeting was called by British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. She was joined by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the foreign ministers of Britain, France and Russia, while their Chinese counterpart Wang Yi joined them virtually for the talks of just over an hour. A US official described the talks as constructive and with a lot of convergence, but also said that no country was satisfied with the composition of this interim government, including the Chinese. So far, only China and Russia have indicated any willingness to work with the group, but no country has moved to recognize the Taliban government. Afghanistan was also the subject of virtual talks by the group of 20 major economies. This included the participation of several other nations, including Qatar, the hub for Taliban diplomacy. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, addressing the G20, renewed concerns about the Islamist caretaker government. Currently, it does not have any non-Taliban members and no women, but has ministers blacklisted by the United Nations on terrorism allegations. And for more on this, senior journalist Ray Locker joins us live from Washington, D.C. Ray, good to see you and thank you very much for joining us at this hour. Let's talk about the all-important 9-member Credentials Committee at the UNGA this year. There have been questions over who will be recognized as the legitimate representatives of Myanmar and Afghanistan. How significant is this committee to the Assembly and to the two nations going forward?
Well, I think both countries need recognition by the UN, need to be part of the international community if they're going to succeed at all. Obviously, Afghanistan, for the last 20 years, its government has been recognized by the international community. But now that the Taliban is in charge, it needs foreign aid, needs, to be recognized in a way where it can deal with other countries. And as long as the Taliban sticks to the government that it has, that's going to be harder to come by. And the same with Myanmar. I mean, it was considered basically a success a few years ago when it was transitioning back to a democracy. The coup earlier this year has really upset all of that. And they really need the kind of recognition that Afghanistan needs, or else its economy is going to continue to be a backwater.
Ray, the Taliban has set up a showdown, so to speak. Is the Credentials Committee likely to consider Taliban's request to speak at the UNGA? And what impact will this have, considering now and the latest that the 5 permanent UN Security Council nations, including China, have agreed on an inclusive Afghan government?
Well, I think, if the Taliban makes some movement toward conciliation with the larger UN and the Security Council, the chances of having a representative speak are fairly good. I mean, all sorts of controversial world leaders have spoken before the UN, and the Taliban really isn't that much different than some of the previous people we've talked about. So I think that's probably going to happen. But it's kind of hard to tell. I'm no expert on that. But I think if it shows some kind of signs that it's moving in the right direction, the chances are fairly likely that it would get that.
It will be Prime Minister Modi's 7th trip to the States. It is considered a very crucial meeting. We know that the agenda, especially for India, is strengthening ties with the USA, the Afghanistan crisis, the pandemic, and of course, the climate crisis. But what would be the likely outcome of both Quad and UNGA?
Well, I think, every time the Prime Minister comes here, he gets a great reception, certainly from Indian Americans. And we saw that again today when he arrived at Andrews Air Force Base in Washington. I think more movement on climate change, some agreement to get more vaccines for COVID for India, I think would be a big victory. And continuing to work with various leaders at the General Assembly, in the room itself and on the margins, which often happens, And then we have the Quad Summit coming up tomorrow, which I think will be also a very big deal.
All right. Ray Locker, thank you very much for talking to WION and for your insights.